Welcome back to another chat on perspectives. Um, I just want to comment on something that came up in the recent conversation I had with Arthur Vez Lewis. And I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast about natural order and artificial. Um, it's been on my mind since the podcast, so I wanted to say something about it. In the conversation I had, Arthur Vez Lewis brought up the question. Um, People are talking about this is what's happening right now, that we are in a spiritual war. What do I feel about that comment? And do I feel we're in a spiritual war? Um, Now, yes and no. I think that kind of framing can be kind of problematic, but there's something important we need to bring out of it. I don't like the term war in anything, spiritual war, because as soon as you term something as a war, that kind of language triggers a kind of sense of conflict. Because war is used um, in so many triggering ways. We have the war on terror, the war on drugs. Even when we are supposedly doing something good, they call it a war, which makes it a kind of, a conflict. Um, we shouldn't be having a war for peace, you know. Um, so I wouldn't call it a spiritual war, but I think we're going through a spiritual uh, contestation, a spiritual, you could call it a struggle. Um, and again, although I try to stay away from using the word spiritual because it is also a word which is very loaded, um, I would like to see it as a kind of contestation between the inner being of humanity and certain outer forces. Or we could call it a kind of, we're going through a struggle between the inner uh, evolution or evolvement of the human being and de-evolutionary forces. We can put it that way. You know, I think I've used this analogy before. Is that you need friction to be able to create forward momentum. If you're driving a car, the tires of the car need to have friction against the road to propel them forward. So I don't necessarily have this good and bad, black and white, good and evil and goodness type of framing. I think that's quite too simple because it puts us kind of them and us, either or. But there are times when certain entropic or denying forces become more prevalent, but those can also become a catalyst to shift more in advancement or to help to develop certain ways or paths. Because the my understanding is that life and the universe and the cosmos works in balance. There's an inherent balance mechanism. And if there's an increase in chaotic forces and denying or negating forces that then tip the balance further one way, out of balance into chaos, then to gain reorder of that balance, you need a rising up of the balancing forces, the developmental, evolutionary, um, spiritual, transcendental forces, call them what you will. But you see, if there's a rise in chaos, you need a rise in balance to reorder. So you see how these things work out. But I do feel that we are not only in physical turmoil, but there is a metaphysical question at stake of retaining our inner life, our inner connection to the sacred, to something which is greater and beyond the physical aspect of life, to the whole living intelligence of existence. And as human beings, we need to keep that connection. So, this thing will come up repeatedly because I feel that in everything we talk about, whether it's technology and transhumanism or chaos or strife or war, we're talking about um, the inner sacredness of life, the connection to um, the spiritual impulse, the metaphysical reality, and those forces which are trying to pull away and just focus on the physical, the material, and those kind of controlling, negating aspects. So maybe everything we see are aspects of this, the inner, the drive towards development, increasing development connection with the impulse of life and those forces which try to pull you off path. But interestingly, in fact, just yesterday I was reading an account of a site. I was reading an account of a remote viewer, and a remote viewer who came in contact with another intelligence, and they were warning this person, saying there's times of conflict ahead on your planet. And this is just a brief extract that I thought I'll just bring up, because the remote viewer says to this non-physical intelligence, shocked and astounded, I asked, who is the enemy? And the entity replies, the battle will be with people, ordinary people, but with a will not of their own. So the battle will be against other people on our planet, but with a will not of their own. As if there are the forces acting through people who unknowingly are not acting from their own self or their own essence. They may be being influenced by other forces. And this, the reason I say that is because when I read that, I was reminded of an essay which I put out a few months ago, an essay which I called Materialism and the Loss of Soul, because I talk about a very similar thing. I talk about how Rudolf Steiner mentioned that there may be people walking upon this planet but may not have a soul or an inner life as we understand it. And so I'll read a little extract from what I wrote in this essay. I wrote, it may be that there are people walking around in physical incarnation, in physical bodies, yet who are lacking, for want of a better word, a soul. Rudolf Steiner made note of this 100 years ago when he stated, and now I'm quoting Rudolf Steiner, a kind of surplus of individuals is appearing in our times who are not truly human beings. They make the impression of a human being if we do not look closely, but they are not human in the fullest sense of the word. We encounter people in human form who only in their outer appearance are individuals. In truth, these are humans with a physical, etheric and astral body, but beings are embodied in them, beings that make use of these individuals in order to operate through them. So it kind of suggesting that there are individuals who being used as vessels, and other forces, darker forces, are operating through them to create certain agendas. That's quite a metaphysical scenario, because there will be maybe some people find it hard to believe that we can have other entities inside of us. But of course, if we look at our religious traditions, all the great traditions have talked about a kind of spirit possession, and how certain darker energies can latch onto us if we are feeling vulnerable, or if we are attracted to certain darker motives and intentions. So there is a kind of contestation going on between people, but I think behind that there are going to be other forces, non-physical forces, that are in play. And in fact, I've been quite surprised how recently quite a few people have been bringing up this subject. They've been saying the more they are looking into and feeling into the subject of what's going on in the world today, they feel that it goes beyond the physical, that there's a kind of metaphysical order in play. I remember listening to an interview with Catherine Austin Fitz, who was the Undersecretary in Housing Development in the U.S. administration, who's fairly well known now for speaking out against the tyranny and has her own knows very much about economic financial situation. And in an interview, she was saying very openly that she feels that this is, a metaphysical situation in play. There are forces beyond the physical which are involved in this. And just the other day, just a few days ago, I was reading a transcript of an interview that Naomi Wolf gave. Now, Naomi Wolf was well known for writing for being part of the feminist movement and writing books about that subject. And she's spoken out a lot against what's going on in terms of the surveillance society and the loss of controls. But in this talk, she actually said she feels that we are dealing with metaphysical forces, something beyond the physical. And that surprised me. I thought, whoa, you don't often see a prominent, well-known person speaking in those terms. And I think more of us are feeling this, is that we feel that there are perhaps influences which are trying to splinter the internal connection with something sacred, with, we can call it, with your source, with the soul, with the spirit. There are dehumanizing factors or forces coming into play, which we can see very strongly through the push towards transhumanism, which again is a topic I come back to a lot. So there's a kind of humanizing and dehumanizing forces at play here, and they are being enacted through the physical and metaphysical domain. And I feel that more and more of people are waking up to that realization. There's something internal which is saying something's not right here. Something isn't right, but not just on a physical footing. There's a misplacement in my energy. There's a misplacement in the human spirit. There has to be, with all the atrocities going on. And any human spirit in its right balance would not operate and behave in the way that we see in the world today. So I feel that we need to recognize and speak out for the human spirit, and to say, we are in a situation where we need to compel ourselves and others to connect to the inner being of the person and the human spirit, and to deny the splintering, the fragmentation of the inner world of the human being, which is perhaps under threat or potentially under threat right now. Saying that, I do wholeheartedly sense that we, through these contestation and moments of chaos and uncertainty, the human spirit will be advanced, will be pushed more into manifestation in the material world, because it's being called forth. Sometimes, as I said, we need friction to call forth momentum. So the more of us that we can speak out and recognize and say quite openly, I am representing the human spirit, and the human spirit has to operate through this physical world, and the metaphysical realm does exist and is a foundation for the physical realm, then the more we can bring this out and not be hesitant to speak of it. And I think these are the times when we need to recognize the realm of the spirit working through materiality and working through the human, in order to go to where we need to go in these times. And there's a lot of potential we're moving towards, an incredible potential future, which has to have the human spirit in it, and therefore it now needs to be called out into play. So there's my thoughts on that subject that I brought up for today. So thanks for listening thus far. I'll connect with you again next time.